Harrison.
Abstentions. The resolution is adopted. We do have some other measures to come before the Senate.
Anyone else, by an increase in an expense, would hold their prices down for the last 4 years, we wouldn't be worried about this thing. But of course, they can't do Senator in the slightest degree. It's certainly not intended. But I wish for an increase in expense allowance. But an attorney who lives in the northern part of Alabama to serve in this body. And with that, Mr. President,
I believe the gentleman from Coleman alluded to the fact, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, that I live, sleep at home.
the original resolution and act that was passed last week increased the monthly expense allowance from $300 to $500 per month and from $50 to $75 per day. Now, there was some doubt as to whether or not that increase would be within the President's guidelines on inflation. Also, of course, there was a tremendous negative reaction to it by the public. And in an effort now to come within the President's guidelines on inflation, and yet also allow the members of the legislature some relief because of the greatly increased expenses that they have while serving in Montgomery.
The Montgomery Police Department's roster of officers is 2 less than last week's number. 2 officers in separate incidents have been dropped from the force because they broke the law. One man, John Lang, a detective and a 5-year veteran of the force, was suspended without pay and placed in the city jail for charges of selling illegal drugs, which he reportedly took from the police confiscated drug shelves. The other officer, James Balkema, a 2-year veteran, was officially suspended from the force this morning and also placed in the city jail on charges of felony grand larceny. Balkema and his roommate, Lee Jackson, allegedly tried to report stolen some $6,000 worth of merchandise from their apartment, which had never been stolen in the first place. The two also admitted to having stolen a motorcycle in the Arrowhead subdivision some time ago. Montgomery Police Chief Charles Swindle says the cases are unrelated and in no way should implicate lawlessness on the force.
I don't think any financial problem should have led either one of the men into making a step in the direction they did, and that's a criminal step.
With the combination of the incidences during the past several weeks involving the police officers, combined with the exodus of some officers from this police department to other forces who perhaps offer higher pay, do you think this will provide an incentive for a higher offering of more money from the city departments to help pay the officers of Montgomery more money?
Well, yes, we've already asked the council or the mayor, and the mayor, of course, we didn't have to ask the mayor. The mayor came to me with the idea, and he's seeking every way he can to upgrade these officers' pay.
Swindle says that the incidents come as a shock to him and the force, but the law is the law. Both men will now have to go through the entire process of the courts, with both facing possible prison sentences. Swindle says the cases cannot be directly attributed to the financial plight on the part of either officer, but both were reportedly short on money. At the same time, Swindle says the cases may help their chances of getting raises for the department personnel, something that has kept the department some 70 men short of full force. As far as the lawmen breaking the law, Swindle says it's very rare, these 2 separate incidences bringing to less than a dozen the number of such cases in the Montgomery Police Department in the last 26 years. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
At approximately 4:45 p.m. today, a lone white male entered Richardson's Pharmacy on East Fairview Avenue and at gunpoint robbed the pharmacist of a quantity of narcotics. He's identified as a white male in his early 20s, 5'9", 130 to 140 pounds, wearing a dark jacket and light blue jeans. He then left traveling east on Fairview Avenue, it's believed.
What type of drugs were taken?
I can't discuss that at this time. We'll just have to go as a quantity of narcotics.
Are they the type which could be dangerous?
Yes, sir. They are controlled substances.
Governor George Wallace was involved in his usual busy day at the office on this, the final work day of his 3rd term in office.
His staff has worked over the past few weeks getting the office in shape for the incoming Fob James administration. Much of the transition work falls on the shoulders of the governor's new secretary, Elvin Stanton, who has been working at a rapid pace.
Today has been mostly packing and moving out, but I have been working for at least a week with the new press secretary, new secretary, John Hamm, and it's involving the explaining of the procedures of the office, telephone situation, filing procedures, things of that nature. Simple things, but things that we have been doing in the event that he would like to continue to do them that way or some other fashion.
Yeah, after so many years of being occupied by the Wallace administration, you've got a pretty big task here.
Well, we want to be especially careful to preserve the records of this office and the governor's office for whatever value they may be to history. All of his press releases, all of the tape recordings of his press conferences, his correspondence, his invitations, those he were able to accept, his addresses to the legislature, all of those things are kept by the press secretary's office during the Wallace administration, and we want to preserve them and be sure that they are properly cataloged and filed for whatever value it will be years from now after you and I are long gone.
So actually, when you leave the office next week, then your task of kind of getting things in order for the previous governor doesn't end.
No, it will not. We will follow through with the records. Some of them will be in archives and history, the official state records. Others will be at UAB in Birmingham, where an historian already has been assigned to catalog the papers, to evaluate them, and make them available for students at a later date for research purposes.
The governor's office is not the only one undergoing changes. Lieutenant Governor Jerry Beasley has cleared out his office and has taken up residence at a Hull Street location in Montgomery, where he will practice law. Staff members of incoming Lieutenant Governor George McMillan are in the process of decorating the office to suit McMillan. Down the hall, the office for the chairman of the Senate Finance and Taxation Committee remains quiet, but come Tuesday, the office is expected to be occupied by Senator Richard Pearson of Birmingham. The office of President Pro Tem of the Senate has already been filled. Senator Finis St. John of Cullman serves. In the House, the office of Speaker has not changed, with Representative Joe McCorkadale serving for the next 4 years. Jack Biddle of Gardendale occupies this office. Helping him in chairing the Rules Committee is Representative Lee Pegues of Marion. The former Speaker Pro Tem of the House lost out on a bid for re-election to the legislature. This office will be occupied by Representative Rick Manley of Demopolis. Representative Walter Owens is the new head of the powerful Ways and Means Committee. It marks the first change in 8 years. The office of State Treasurer remains in the hands of Annie Laurie Gunter. She takes her oath of office Monday along with Governor James and other constitutional officers. Betty Frink, a familiar name and face on Capitol Hill, begins a second term as state auditor, so this office remains intact for 4 more years. The picture in the office of Secretary of State is much changed. Agnes Baggett retires from politics, and the office will now be in the hands of a male Secretary of State. Don Siegelman takes his oath of office Monday. There will be other changes in other offices around the Capitol in the months ahead. Bob James is making changes in a deliberate, methodical manner. George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Marshal Jerry Ray and his wife, Brenda. Minor St. John and his wife, Juliet. C.C. Torrance Jr. and his wife.
Well, when my father came to Montgomery in 1872, he lived in a house on the site, on the present site of the Empire Theater, and I personally was born in a house on the site of the Jefferson Davis Hotel. At a very early age, my family moved to the west, and I lived up on 5 Points Hill on Wilkerson Street from 1890 until 1920. But the boundaries of the residential district probably extended even in later days as far as where the new governor's mansion is on Perry Street, which is the Thigpen Hill home, and the important streets also were Church Street and Catoma Street and Moulton Street, where there were some of the fine old homes. The Methodist Church had an important church at the site of the present federal building.
What was it like before the turn of the century?
Well, to go back to about 1894 to 1895, we were in the backward ages, in the dark ages as compared to now, as far as modern conveniences as we know them today and the facilities that we know today. We had gas light and very little, if any, electricity at that time. The bathrooms did not have the porcelain equipment that it has now, and we had galvanized iron tubs and lavatories. The telephones that came in later, to reach Central, you could not get any call through without going through the operator. You had to use a crank, which rang a bell, and they were on the wall.
What else was different from today?
Transportation in the city, in some of the suburbs and downtown, from Court Square down to the railroad station or to the river, there was a trolley line, and there was a trolley line up Dexter Avenue to the Capitol. There was a trolley line up Montgomery Street all the way to the top of the hill to 5 Points and out into the suburbs. The colored population lived mainly in the section of West Montgomery, of Holt Street and Day Street, where they had the old colored churches, and the houses there were mainly small wooden houses that were known as shotgun houses.
What about education?
As far as the schools were concerned, there were elementary schools, but there were no boys' high schools. And after a boy finished grammar school, he had no place to go.
Well, now, girls were not expected to go to high school anyway, were they?
Some girls, there were some girls' high schools, but there were no boys' high schools. And in the late 1880s, the businessman of Montgomery brought an important educator from the University of Virginia, Professor J.M. Stark, who founded the university school and who had an excellent preparatory school. And he was strong on the classics, on mathematics, on English, and on spelling, mental arithmetic, and the important families of Montgomery sent their sons there, where they received an excellent foundation. And in the cases where these boys wanted to go to college, they had very little, if any, difficulty getting into college because of this excellent foundation they had from Professor Stark.
What about some of the downtown residential areas that have been restored?
The Cottage Hill area was important at that time, but the houses were small and not too important. But then that went down as conditions changed and the residential sections moved out further. But now there is a demand for these old homes, and the Cottage Hill district is being restored, which makes it interesting because it fell, as it were, and now it is rising again. And the same holds true in a business way of the Conway Street district. The most important business element in the city was the wholesale business. Montgomery has never been a large industrial section, and that covered Lower Conway Street, and that now is being restored. So in other words, we go in cycles. Sections rise, and then they fall, and then they rise again. And that's the situation in which we find ourselves today, which is interesting and to the credit of Montgomery, and in which Montgomeryans take a pride and a delight. And to have these former important business sections and even residential sections restored means a great deal. Of course, at that time, there were no such things as business centers such as a mall and Eastdale, and there were no throughways and important highways.
Now,
and traffic, transportation in and out of the city was mainly by, if not entirely, by railroad. Of course,
you were right in there, the railroad and the river together,
going in and out of Montgomery, but none of them were paved. They were dirt roads, graveled. Clay and gravel were the topping of them. Transportation was by buggy or carriage or surrey, and with the use of horses, and by wagons drawn by mules. And the farmers came to town where they did their shopping in and around Court Square, which was the center of all business activity from a retail standpoint. But there were no automobiles up to certainly not until 1905 and 1910. And so the conditions were entirely different. It was an easier and a simpler and a less hectic life.
The Senate voted 32-0 on the first bill on its calendar today.
On page 1 of the calendar, Senate Bill 1 by Mr. St. John to amend Section 29-1-4 Code of Alabama 1975, which provides for the time of meeting and the length of organizational and regular sessions so as to alter the meeting date of the first regular session of each legislative term.
The House vote was 89-0 to delay the start of the regular session until April the 17th. Without a postponement, the regular session would start February 6th, leaving Governor James little time to get his budgets in line for the lawmakers to consider. Both houses passed a bill to authorize increases in salaries of the administration assistants of the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor. The Senate, on an amendment by Senator Bishop Barrett of Montgomery, set the maximum at $22,000 annually. The House agreed on $21,900. Both are within a shadow of the President's guidelines, permitting about a 31% salary increase over a 4-year period. The assistants now draw just under $17,000 a year. A resolution by Senator Don Harrison of Montgomery was adopted by the Senate, the House Senate to rules. The resolution would send 2 members of the legislature at their own expense to Washington February 4th, with a group of Alabama farmers protesting the plight of the farmers.
It's only equitable And the family farm is dying in the state of Alabama. And the family farm is dying in the United States of America. And, Mr. Chair, I move for a suspension of the rules and immediate adoption of the resolution.
A bill allowing those people who are entitled to an ad valorem tax exemption because they make less than $7,500 a year and are over 65 years of age or handicapped passed the House. The lower chamber adopted a resolution asking the Georgia legislature to repeal its out-of-state hunting law, which now limits 100 out-of-state hunters to secure licenses in each county. The Senate returns at 11 in the morning and the House at 5 p.m. for the next to the last day of the special session. Reporting from the state legislature, George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
We have filed today with the Public Service Commission a request to let us do it by giving a credit on the February bill.
You think you'll have any opposition to doing it in this manner?
No, no. If you had an active account in November and still have an active account in February, we will give you a credit on the bill. If, for any reason, you do not have an active account in February, we'll give you a check.
When will the Alabama Power Company file for another rate increase?
We have already filed. Last week we filed with a rate increase with the Public Service Commission for around $282 million, and we also asked them to consider it an emergency request and let us put some rates into effect on the bond while they were hearing the original filing. They have not met and acted on this request yet.
The gavel came down for the last time at 2:20 in the House on a motion by Representative Tom Sandusky of Mobile. A bill delaying the start of the regular session until April 17th was sent to Governor Fob James for his signature. Another bill of major significance that would enable some homeowners to claim a homestead property tax exemption passed both houses. The bill, sponsored by Representative Phil Kelly, was amended slightly.
Well, the amendments that the Senate added today, George, were merely technical amendments to clean up some of the language that was omitted in by reference service. The bill remains basically the same. That will provide a mechanism for senior citizens age 65 and over who are not required to file a federal income tax to be able to qualify for their homestead exemption or their exemption without, not paying ad valorem tax. It would give them that mechanism to qualify for that exemption.
Okay, they have to go to the courthouse and do what?
Right, they'll be going to the tax assessor's office, and they merely have to sign an affidavit in the tax assessor's office saying that they do make less than $7,500 net taxable income in the preceding year, which would give them that exemption.
The legislature adopted a resolution creating a 40-member joint legislative committee to make budget recommendations to the legislature at each regular session. A Senate filibuster over a package of bills affecting the Alabama Bar Association was averted when a plan was worked out prior to convening for the final day. The bill in the package which failed would have increased fees for taking the bar exam. The lawmakers refused to send a delegation to Washington in support of the farmers. Disagreement over whether it would be a paid trip sent Senator Don Harrison's resolution to a conference committee, and differences could not be ironed out. The legislature did set up an interim committee to make a study of farm problems. The Senate passed a resolution for an interim committee to study the long-range financial needs for the state docks, but it failed in the House. A bill raising the maximum pay for administrative assistants for the lieutenant governor and the Speaker of the House needs the governor's signature. On a vote of 34-0, the Senate confirmed the governor's promotion of Colonel Charles Kelly to the rank of Brigadier General in the National Guard. The first of at least 3 sessions of the Alabama legislature has ended. And now a joint legislative committee begins work on a new state constitution. The committee will hold hearings for 3 weeks beginning next Monday, January the 29th, and it will report back to the full legislature when it convenes in February in another special session. That special session expected to begin February the 13th. Reporting from the state legislature, George Mitchell, WSFA TV News.
Still fighting for a cause, the American Agriculture Movement's Alabama chapter held another in a series of news conferences since their inception just over a year ago. The AAM's goal is for more equal return on their investment on farm products. They call it 100% of parity. Alabama's AAM chairman, E.E. Money, says they are nationally in the process of taking another group of farmers to Washington to continue pressure on congressmen seeking their aid in their plight.
Now, we will not be going for new legislation this year. We're going united in one voice, whether it's for food or fiber. And that is that we are requesting the Congress and the Senate to put pressure on the administration and the Secretary of Agriculture in particular, requesting that they fully implement the 1977 Farm Bill. This is administration's masterpiece. They told Congress and the Senate this will work. This is what we need. Now we want to know why they are not fully implementing that bill. You say, what's included in that bill? I'll just tell you this, that it would assure the producers of food and fiber in this nation of up to 90% of parity at the loan level. Now, you say, well, that's not 100%, it's another step to 100%. Remember, we were 66% this time last year. We're 73 now, according to USDA. So it's another step up the ladder to 100%.
The tractorcade moving through Alabama consists of farmers from some 46 states, and they have hopes that several of the other 4 states will join in. Most of those 4 states are non-participating, or in the case of Hawaii and Alaska, are just too far away to participate. State troopers are escorting the farmers, all 166 units consisting of tractors and trucks, which at times stretch into a 10-mile-long tractorcade. These Alabama farmers will take their tractors and join the rest of the nationwide tractorcade now converging in Birmingham on its way to Washington. Following a huge rally in Atlanta, it's back on the road again. Right now, they're tentatively scheduled to arrive in the nation's capital on February 2nd and then deliver their message. For some of them, including E.E. Money, they say they'll stay as long as it takes to get across what they're after. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
The discussion went on all day, and they tried to determine if there was a problem, if so, how large the problem was, and how to determine how much of a danger of radiation exposure from the concrete blocks existed here in Alabama. At the end of the discussion today, a news conference was held, and the results were announced.
The basic thing we did was develop a skeleton of a possible short-term program and a long-term program to, number one, determine if there is really a problem with the material. The short-term program would do a very limited amount of measurements, but under perhaps artificial circumstances enough to maximize the effect to determine what is the upper bound of it, so we can tell if it is a problem. And it would run 2 to 3 months, I would guess. The longer-term study would be one that would look more at actual conditions that really exist, and would take a year approximately. The starting time would be after it's been reviewed by the other people that are interested in the other states and some people out of EPA Washington, which would allow a little bit bigger review, and sometime starting around first part of March, I would guess.
Florida officials are now awaiting a report from EPA on radiation levels created by the use of some uranium ore in the foundations of houses in that state.
We put in these homes TLD air pumps, or radon progeny integrating sampling unit pumps, that measured the radiation concentration levels in these homes. In each home, we tried to make 4 to 5 measurements over a 1-year period. This would give us a good average radiation level in that home.
Officials here say it could take up to 2 years to complete testing and get the results of that testing. They also have to submit the results of today's study conference to officials in 3 other states, and only if those officials okay today's plans will the testing begin. And that testing, if it's okayed by the other officials, will begin in March. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the Environmental Protection Agency Lab.
orientation